Okay.
Attention, please.
Yo. 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 Yo.
What's going on, everyone? It is David Palmer, Loyalists, and Dr. Ann Wohlcke here for History in the Stars. Just days after Pluto made its last ingress into Aquarius. How's it going tonight, Ann?
Things are going great, and I'm enjoying, I think, Pluto in Aquarius. I don't know. I'm feeling kind of discombobulated, actually. How about you?
Yeah, I would say it feels very lopsided. Feels like 16 years of just a lot has happened and you're kind of out of the situation, and there's a lot of reflection, but also maintaining the lessons that have been learned over the last 16 years to stay stable, not freak out over things, like just really find that center through this time. I think that the last couple weeks since we did our last show has been quite wild, the way the world's gone, the divisions with people. And it's going to be interesting, I think, tonight's show, looking at what did the history show the last time that Pluto made its last ingress into Aquarius, and what did that really look like? Because it is, it does have some mirroring effects in many ways, or there are some very common historical transits and events that are all aligning right now. And I think we can learn and grow and find maybe a better way forward opposed to the last time around. What do you think?
If you had asked me last time, I would have said, yes, I have all the faith in the world that we will be able to find a new way out. But as things do most of the time, when you actually get there, it feels so much different.
Yeah.
And I don't know, Pluto in Aquarius should be a good transit for me, I think, or as an air sign, somebody with a lot of air in my chart. And it's been great in a lot of ways, but it's also so strange that I feel like it's that feeling of when the other shoe drops, that you're waiting for the other shoe to drop. And I mean, in world events, it has, but it's very strange to see that we're having these extreme events on a global level, if we think about what we're involved in the world. But the contrast between that and what people are focused on, to see that is very strange. My audio is working, yay.
Yeah, no, it is working good.
But it's really weird that some people seem to be feeling so light and happy, and other people have just vanished. That's what I'm noticing. It feels like people have kind of escaped into something else. And so that's where you wonder, well, what's exactly happening? And so when you go back and look at this time in history, there's so many extremely wild events that were happening during these transits when Pluto went into Aquarius. And we talked about before last time, the one of Henry VIII deciding to marry Anne Boleyn secretly, the exact month, I think, that Pluto went into Aquarius. And then all that happened after that.
Right.
And how he did this legal reformation within Parliament, where it was transforming the actual government at that time, maintaining it in a way that it looked the same, but all of the underpinnings of the government were changing. So then if you look at the American Revolution, and we started to think about the era in the American Revolution that's most like right now is December 1778, right?
Yes.
And it's a time when I think that the war became really very real earlier that year, when in March, when France And when France had basically made a maneuver that made Britain declare war on them when they allied with the United States or with the States. So it's interesting. Then you go towards the end of that year when Britain had declared war on France and the French Revolution is happening. And I think that it's sort of the point at which the war became real for everybody on both sides of the Atlantic. But at the same time, I've been going through newspapers and book publications from that time. And I'm looking mostly from London because I'm a British historian and I have access to all of those archives. Life was carrying on as normal there. It's so fascinating. And I'm sure it was under Henry VIII too. Just people carry on and go to their plays. And what else was I saying was happening? It was so funny. Oh, go to their sermons. They're talking all about church sermons that they were going to. So,
I mean, that kind of echoes right now. I mean, we sit on the television and we watch what's happening in Ukraine or in Palestine or in Lebanon or in Israel countries, right? You're just kind of like, well, I guess I'm ordering from DoorDash still and got to take my kids to school, or the traffic's still moving, the gasoline's still pumping, yet there's all these things that are happening that are way more intense because now we actually can get the information within a millisecond, whereas maybe, you know, you could maybe as a historian say like, oh, well, yeah, information would have taken 3 months every time, or sometimes I think the fastest was 66 days to get on a boat from the colonies back to England. But it's kind of about a 3-month journey if you think about it, if there's a problem or anything like that. We get it in a millisecond, but the same thing's happening.
yeah, that's what's so strange.
So really, it's not how quick the info's going. It is kind of maybe just, well, it's not happening to me here. But when it's happening in the areas, it's maybe not covered about unless we were to use today, for example, and go into Ukraine and go into the towns that Russia has taken over in Ukraine or whatever, and then read letters, look at the stuff, post whatever this will be, and actually get a real sense of what's happening. Mm-hmm. You know, I mean, that's kind of the interesting part. But I think to go back to one of your points, you said, as Pluto's just like come in, it is Pluto. So it's not the planet that's about yippee, like
It's
woohoo, you know, like it subtly comes in, but it also does have a loud message, but it's got a subtlety to it, meaning it does, like, it is kind of a jolt. Like, you mean there might be nuclear bombs going off, which is extreme, but it's coming into you subtly with a commercial right after they say that.
Exactly. Yeah. I don't know what else to say about that, but I guess I would ask you, if you look, okay, so since we're just at the beginning of this Pluto and Aquarius transit, mm-hmm. How would you summarize, in your words, what happens during Pluto and Aquarius during that transit? And like, not only what do we have to look forward to, but we actually probably haven't even wrapped up and come to terms with whatever happened in Pluto and Capricorn. I feel like we're in a transitional period where we won't really recognize what happened until we're probably midway through this one, I don't know, or through the first decade of the transit. Because I think people are operating right now, what I see is people operating mindful of institutions in the way that they already knew them, and kind of moving forward with expectations that whatever they were doing the past few years, those things are still in place. And we might not see where shifts actually happened yet.
That's a great assessment. I mean, I think to boil it down, it would be there is a rift with the people that happens in all the Pluto Aquarius transits. And a lot of it has to do with very Pluto, like these are the boundaries as a human being and as a tribe or a part of this group, in society, and then the larger parts of society are seeing those too. Maybe they're not as pronounced because we're not in those countries, but there seems to be like these different divisions that become very extreme. So we titled this one treason, or traitors, loyalists, and patriots. And so if we use the last transit of Pluto and the last period that it was in a transit of Aquarius, it was 1777 3 times, and then 1778 for those last 2 times, and as it went to that 0 Aquarius point. But then it's December 1st, 1778 is our November 19th, 2024. We're really now covering what is it like now that it's fully here. It's not playing back and forth. And when we look, that's a really big peak moment in the Revolutionary War. Both sides are looking at things like, what do we do? Like, there is kind of a what do we do? One, you have the Continental Army actually having some wins. Is it going to stay that way kind of energy? And you have the British going, well, let's go south. There's a lot of loyalists down there. We can convert them all and we'll win that way. But both are trying to win, but also at the same time, it's the beginning of where we start to see really extreme positions on both sides. But I would say even more so in the Continental Army of if you stay a loyalist, we're going to take away your property. Mm-hmm. You're an enemy to the state. You're an enemy to the trade. Like, you're a traitor. And then that does happen. Benedict Arnold comes up, we'll be talking about today again. And so I look at today's world, and it's really interesting. A lot of people are jumping from social media apps to another app that they feel is going to be a safe place. But a lot of loyalists left the South and jumped all the way into Florida trying to find some sort of safety at this time. So it's interesting to see people start bugging out, because I kind of think of Pluto and then an Aquarius of the energy of I just want to out of this. So Pluto brings that I'm just over things, I'm getting out. But it always is that's the worst thing that you can do. Pluto's about engaging and getting into things. Mm-hmm. So it's interesting, the people that bug out, it creates a harder process for them because there's nowhere to go. It's almost like you can't just jump out of the spaceship once we go into space. And that's actually the biggest psychological issue with becoming an astronaut, right? You can't put the crew at risk because you can't handle being stuck in the spaceship with everyone, or in the shuttle, or however it is, or in the International Space Station, and self-sabotage it to try and get out. So we have to look at it like that. Like, there is no out. There's only through and in. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. And you know what's really interesting, and maybe people will go see this film. Last week I saw the film Heretic with Hugh Grant.
Oh, how was that? And
it's really interesting, and it's very spooky. It's Hugh Grant playing a character that you've never seen him play before, where he's just this kind of really weird, very internal, probably very Pluto Aquarian kind of guy, where he's got in his mind all of the narratives of all of the religions of the world. And onto his doorstep appear these 2 girls who are Mormon. And they're coming in because they've heard that he wants to know more about the Book of Mormon. And so they're there to talk to him about this. And it gets weirder and weirder. And I don't want to destroy it for anybody. But what's interesting is one of the themes that comes up is one of the characters, I think, does talk about Dante's Inferno.
Really?
And the idea, and there's the picture of Dante's Inferno, that image of hell, the different layers of, is it hell? Why? Yeah, because it's the Inferno.
Inferno, right? Purgatory, and heaven, which is Paradiso, yeah. Mm-hmm.
So the message of Dante's Inferno is the only way out is through. And that's the message of the film, too. So, and a big part of the film is about belief and disbelief. So I'm wondering if, I think that's what we're seeing, is we're seeing a lot of beliefs tested in reality now. It's, okay, so everybody had these beliefs coming up to the election in the United States. So just looking at it from the US perspective. Then the election happens and Trump wins, and so it means something on both sides because of what we believed that would represent up to the election. So now it's happened, and what we're seeing play out is people kind of responding according to according to their beliefs. And they're still speaking and saying, I'm going to do this, or I have done this because of my beliefs of what would happen. But there comes a point where all of a sudden you have to step into the beliefs and live them out. Where what I'm thinking of for the American Revolution perspective is what you were bringing up about the Loyalists and Patriots. So when it gets to the point where it goes state by state, where they decide what's going to happen to Loyalist properties, people who don't want to join the Patriot side, what are we going to do with their property? And it starts to get figured out, a few years down the road from where we are now. But it comes down to, do you want to keep your farm or not? And if you are a loyalist, we're taking your land.
I know.
So it's, can you actually, in reality, it's not just beliefs anymore. You haven't separated yourself and said, I'm just going to sit here. I'm not going to those Sons of Liberty's gatherings. I'm just going to be in my shop making money. It's all of a sudden it gets to the point where you have to decide how you're going to actually live. But I don't know if that's a Pluto and Aquarius thing or not.
It very much so is. It is the belief energy. It kind of feels like a belief when you get tribal, right? But really with Pluto, it's more of this deeper psychological and what is being seducing the people, right? So the ideas that are seducing people, or Aquarius also deals with complex situations in not the idea of society as a structure is Capricorn. The idea of just society itself and how humans are interacting or dealing with situations on the more human level, like on the surface, let's say, of your life, not like the whole hierarchy system of society, but much more of the gossip, the situations that are happening between people. Social media is a good example for today, or just the gossip back, during the Renaissance about, oh, this is cool, this is not, this is hip, this is not. But when you add Pluto in there is this seduction of, and Pluto always brings dramatic amounts of fear, right? So if you notice right now, it's fear on both sides. And there's a lot of fear. And so people are reacting off that fear, thinking it's a belief, when really it's like, can you think for your own self? And what would be your so instead of thinking about what you don't want, what do you want and what's your contribution to it? So if you think of the history of then, the contribution of the British was to maintain the colonial order even after the rebellion, right? Like this whole Revolutionary War, this whole Declaration of Independence was, once we win, we're going to stay and keep it back to normal. So we're going to just not change anything. Just going to come back to normal. We don't want to try to hopefully kill everybody because they're helping us get all of the tea and get the tobacco and get the cotton and get all these things. But we're going to make sure that we remember that we don't want them to hate us fully either. So it's a weird kind of situation. But that's also where Aquarius is about abrupt change out of nowhere. So wherever the side is bringing abrupt change always does win, whether it's Henry VIII with his abrupt change of, we're leaving the church and I'm creating a new church. So there has to be that double side. Like you're not just leaving something, you're going to create something and it actually has a realistic, and it addresses a problem at the same time and it has a solution to the problem. So the Patriots and the Continental Army's solution was, let's be independent from a monarch and let's form a republic. And let's actually let the people rule the people. And so there really wasn't a solution for the British. It was like, we're just going to get, the solution was end the war, get these people back in line and back to normal. And so if you were to use those basic principles today, that's kind of what the election was about. Like, maintain the order and the normal. Anybody who's not about the normal, try to keep them back in line, and let's just keep this the way it's been going forever. And then there's a side that's like, it needs to come back to the people. It's gotten too far away from the people. And the solution is to get rid of all these systems of government that aren't working.
Right.
So,
I was trying to find one of the documents that I had, but I'm not ready to go to it yet. So here's the thing so during the time of the American Revolution, I would say that there were two sides, right? The British side, the American side, the Patriots and the Loyalists. But there's another thing happening within Britain as well, that it's also about Parliament and the Prime Minister and the Cabinet wanting control of the government in Britain to go a certain way, where you have also a monarch who is reacting to the revolution in a particular way of thinking, by really old standards, that he's the monarch and he has this divine authority to protect the colonials, and why won't they just listen to him, right? Because all he wants is what's best for those guys. So there's that traditional authority figure, and then there are newer authorities who are on the British side, and then there's the Patriots too. So it's almost like there's three sides. So there are two sides that are pretty new historically, kind of battling it out. And one of the things they have really in common is that a lot of those people are men who became really influential because of the global trade networks. So it's like there's new money involved, but there's also people who are aristocratic with money and people who aren't aristocratic with money. So it's really there are blurry lines between all these sides too. So it feels like for a while everything's been coexisting, but at the point of this American Revolution, that's the point at which people have to take sides. And then if you think later to the French Revolution, that's a huge point at which people have to take sides.
Yes.
Once they declare, okay, we're going to be a republic, and we have this new authority. What are we going to do with the king? It's actually kind of happening in England too, but in a different way. So
well, and I like how you look at those. What's the weird situation is whether it's George Washington, who was a former British captain, now is a continental general. It's in charge of the whole entire military operation of the Continental Congress, but of the Revolutionary War. It's interesting if you look at now, whether you look at Trump, he was a Democrat, not a Democrat anymore, right? Because now we're dealing with it in a different way. You have RFK, who was a Democrat, who's now an independent. You have Tulsi Gabbard, who was a Democrat, now a Republican. So you see the same kind of switcheroo that you saw during the American Revolutionary War, right? Used to be on the side that we're now against, and we've joined the team we are with now, where I don't see that on the other side. I don't see a lot of, I mean, you see like the Dick Cheneys, but they don't switch parties. They didn't switch parties. They didn't actually come out and say, I'm a Democrat now. Mm-hmm. So there's that like weird thing right now. And then you're even seeing, I think you have a great graph to show like who were the kind of people who became loyalists or patriots during that time. And then there was a lot of undecideds. But to me, what happened during this election is a replication of that chart of who decided to become a patriot and who decided to be a loyalist. And it's kind of ironic because that's actually what the media is echoing, not that data from the Revolutionary War, but the data from the election that just happened on November the 5th in 2024, it echoes the same stats and types of people and how they voted during this recent election.
So I have that table here. So it's showing the Loyalists versus Patriots versus neutral populations during the American Revolution. And it shows, obviously, within the United States, right?
Right.
So 40 to 45% of people are patriots, and most of them are small farmers, artisans, tradespeople, Enlightenment-inspired leaders, and advocates of self-governance. Loyalists are 15 to 20%, wealthy merchants, British officials, conservative Anglicans, some enslaved people and Native Americans, who obviously are being coaxed by the British to join their side, because the British are saying, "Oh, then we'll give you your territory back and we'll give you freedom," and so they're joining that side as well. 60 to 80,000 of them immigrated to Canada, Britain, or other British territories after the war.
Makes a lot of sense.
So not even all of them, right, though? So, and they lost property and social standing. And the neutral undecided, 35 to 45%. So most of all these people who are just, I'm a farmer, I live out in the countryside, I'm a Quaker, I'm a pacifist, or I'm in America for many different reasons. And they just adapt as it goes on.
Yeah, I think it's so wild because it makes me think of the electorate. There was a huge undecided, but we know which side that they did turn. And during that time, that undecided, we're just going with whatever is going to happen, right? Like if the British came into town and be like, yes, I guess everything's the way it has been. Of course, we're loyal to King George and the cause. But if the Continental Army came in, I'm a patriot. I'm not on that side because it does become like if you're not part of this, you can leave. Like bye-bye.
Right.
And I think that's really interesting because it's so much like the time prior. Like if you were a Catholic in England at the time under King Henry VIII, within a moment's notice, you're not allowed to be one anymore. So you can either leave or you can join the new Church of England. So I think there's a lot of fear going around because these transits are really extreme with Pluto and Aquarius. They're not nice. That's why I said for so many years, like, it's not going to be, looking at the history, I was always like, oh, this is going to get nasty. And I think that's where people have to start to think about right now. Like you're seeing a lot of people who are kind of like loyal to the old cause, jumping into new apps and also like not wanting to be patriots, which is really interesting. The way that the country was founded, not wanting to be that way, which I find really odd. Because let's be honest, Trump's talking about going after the people inside the government and of this country that are not patriotic.
Right, and there's a lot of fear.
It's really, and I can understand the fear, though.
There's a lot of fear based on what people have been expecting to happen, and based on whatever media you've been consuming was telling you was going to happen. So what I find interesting is that once it happened and this election happened, and now we're seeing this interesting coalition of people being brought into this future government, and then also seeing Donald Trump come out with his proclamations that he was doing daily, it seemed like. I don't know if he's done any recently. I watched a few of them when he came out and said, and now we're going to go after the drug deal or the cartels, right? And he would every day come out and kind of give his proclamation about what he was going to be doing. So it's just like there's a lot of proclaiming and appointing and hope about a lot of people. For a lot of people, it's victorious just that certain people are being appointed possibly to positions. Or there's the opposite reaction of, oh no, what's Matt Gaetz going to do? Or what, he's going to, I don't even know what the fear is for that, but it's just like there's so much fear out there based on everything that is being said that it's going to happen. Right. And then meanwhile, we're launching missiles. Or not us, but our missiles are being launched. But now I guess it's the UK's missiles that were launched.
Today was that the UK's missiles were launched into Russia from Ukraine.
So
it's back to back within 2 days, which even makes this even weirder, right? The two countries that were at each other's literal throats for the Revolutionary War during this last time as Pluto are trying to jam weapons into Ukraine to hit Russia with them together.
Mm-hmm. Is it also that I wonder if I was thinking of this whole idea of people belonging to groups, right? That they've decided, well, I belong to this group, so I'm going off to this app. Like, goodbye, everybody. I'm out of here. It's the same thing that's happening, or similar. It's not exactly the same, but similar to this whole idea of NATO. That is a World War II remnant, something that was meant to prevent another world war from breaking out. That there should be this cushion between the Soviet territories and the Western territories, and that we should not expand in their direction unless we agreed we wouldn't expand. Then we start to expand, and it throws this whole NATO thing out. But you'll hear people talking about how, well, Ukraine can belong to NATO, or other people saying no, they can't. But again, it's another group or allegiance from a previous time that we are still operating according to. And what's so weird is that meanwhile, the Soviet Union fell, so we don't have the old Cold War terms to call everything, but people are still acting from that. Like, I hear it so much, like those communist, fascists, like on each side, everybody's using these terms from the 40s and 50s to label each other. So are those terms even relevant anymore?
Well, it reminds me of the League of Nations after World War I. It's that League of Nations that comes together that causes Hitler to go after France and to put it into their face and recreate the whole scenario of the League of Nations. And it makes me think of this moment where Putin's now said, well, you're going to keep doing this, I'm going to use nuclear war. Russian state TV shows that it's going to hit all the European countries, and they're very specific ones. France, like it's like replaying like this old story all over again of like, oh, all you in NATO that I don't like. Like, is Putin that, they called Trump Hitler, but the irony is the only person invading new countries over this last 3 years has been Putin. And then this kind of like, he's carrying old USSR of all the, people that before it dissolved in 91 that were carrying this kind of like weird energy about NATO that happened about them, right? So it's like, that's where the Uranus of the history is kind of happening all over again. Like, it's kind of like, build all these coalition of countries to go against the USSR. The same way the League of Nations did that to make sure what's funny is you have to add North Korea, because really the main thing that like NATO, but also just like this more UN Council or the G20 have all been, whether it's Iran or North Korea, to try and make sure that you don't have nuclear weapons. So, of course, North Korea is now with Russia, and they're with Russia at the boundary line of Ukraine and now joined forces with Russia. So not only are those weapons going off into Russian territories that are United States and United Kingdom, long striking missiles, but they're hitting North Koreans. So there's a North Korea aspect to this of, oh, you've always been trying to tell us not to make weapons, and now you're striking us. And so the remnants to me is, this always doesn't happen well. Coalitions when it's against this, like, we're better than you kind of energy, or we're the ones that know. Going back to the history of Pluto and Aquarius, and I asked because we just finished it, the Pluto retrograde back into Capricorn for the last time, and then us waiting to see, what happened in that time. And it was the Treaty of Fort Pitt, which was the United States' first formal treaty, was with the Native American tribe, the Lenape, out of Delaware. And the treaty established a military alliance and permitted American troops to traverse the Lenape territory, aiming to secure Native American support against the British forces. So the United States' first formal treaty, even though they're not the United States, right? It's technically just the Continental Congress and the Army. Their first treaty, the last time that Pluto retrograded back into Capricorn, like we just had, was with the Native Americans. Like, hey, can we move through your territory? And we're letting you know with respect. Whereas we have to remember the French Indian War that was prior, that the British and the French were at it, and the Indians were involved with all that, the natives then. So if you think about it from a Native American standpoint, oh, well, I guess it's, you guys have been here and you guys are going against the British? Great. Because that French Indian War, the French were with the natives. Mm-hmm. And the French are with the Americans during that time. So it reminds me kind of like this really weird moment here of like these smaller treaties and these alliances that have like, let's try and build something here, opposed to this kind of huge, bigger conglomerate, multinational situation. Doesn't work. Like it ends up not working. And I think nobody would believe that the Continental Army would do what it did in the end of the war. And I find it really interesting that it was that treaty that was like the last Pluto Capricorn thing. And it makes me wonder in America now, it's like what it would be in the history of America is the election is won by the one candidate that the mass media and the government, the federalized part of America did not want to have. Mm-hmm. That it was a treaty between the voters of the country to say, I don't care if he's a criminal, I don't care if he's this or that, but I don't want this anymore.
Right.
And so that's been the alliance, that's the treaty that's been made. Even by people you wouldn't believe would join that team, whether we see that on the top end or the bottom end, right? It's happening throughout the numbers, right? So it's like, that's, I think, the interesting part, because then once we get to the beginning, so I asked, what happened after December 1st? And it's the British strategy to go south. We've got a lot of loyalists there. We'll go to South Carolina and we go to Georgia and we take those places over, but the loyalists never do join in wide numbers and they never do gain control. Or the loyalist military engagements. Loyalist militias participated in various military actions against British troops. or alongside the British troops. Notably, the Battle of Camden in August of 1780 saw a significant Loyalist presence. However, the defeat of Loyalist forces at the Battle of Kings Mountain in October 1780 marked a turning point, diminishing Loyalist military influence in the Southern theater. And then the persecution and the exodus of Loyalists by Patriot forces, including property confiscation, imprisonment, and violence. These conditions prompted many Loyalists to flee their homes. A notable exodus occurred in 1778, where we're at now, when several hundred South Carolina Loyalists marched to British-controlled East Florida to seek refuge and support the British cause. That's how I look at that new Blue Sky app.
It's Florida. That is where
Which is ironic because Florida would be the opposite place they go. But it's like that's there. And I think the interesting part is the post-war consequence. When the British are defeated, many Loyalists evacuated with British forces, relocating to other parts of the British Empire or Canada, like you brought up, 60,000 of them, right? The Caribbean or Britain itself. Those who remain in the United States often face continued discrimination and challenges in reintegrating into the new nation. So I asked, well, who took over the property? And the states took over the property, and they redistributed that. The biggest one was the New York 1779 Act of the Forfeiture and Sale of Estates of persons who had adhered to enemies of this state. And we're actually seeing that echo all over again. I actually warned about this 2 years ago. I don't know if you remember, I did some, people kind of thought it was crazy. I'm like, how is the American debt crisis going to be handled? Property, like there's properties. It's monopoly.
Well, properties, but also a lot of very wealthy people are helping out. That's
true.
I mean, so much of this, really, you know what I want to be talking about, and I'm not going to talk about it, is Henry VIII and the dissolution of the monasteries and how all of that land was redistributed to the supporters of Henry VIII's state. But, I mean, because really we are in very similar astrology to that. But also, I wanted to look at influential supporters of the revolution. I had a table because here's what I was thinking is we're really, again, now we're in this in-between time of where a president's been elected. Yeah. And then we have another president in office who was not allowed to run because of his mental incapacity, but he's still president. And so it's a weird in-between time, and you've talked about that already, right? In your other presidential predictions and all of this, that there's a lot more history or things that we should be expecting to see. But it is a very strange period of time, and what's happening is almost that there's like a shadow cabinet, right? Where there are these people being appointed, and people are reacting to it. And so I was thinking about, well, who were the types of people that were supporting the American Revolution while it was not yet formed, right? There was no country, it was a movement. And so I was wondering what types of people were involved in making it feasible and who was able to step up. So of course I was interested in the estimated net worth of all these people because I'm thinking of the billionaires that we have who've stepped up, right? And all of the people really who are being appointed are very influential people. So I was just curious about the types of people at this time who were involved. And we've talked about so many of them. Everybody knows George Washington, but he was a very wealthy landowner at this point.
Because of his marriage,
Because of his marriage. And I thought about that, David. I thought I should have put who are their wives. Some of them don't have wives, like Benjamin Franklin, or his wife was dead by this time, I think. And I mean, how could such a fine man be expected to marry, right? He was the people's husband.
Well, and he was using that single properties of his or principles that had happened in France, where it'd probably be better if you were single to make the negotiations and the delegations to make the treaties, and even the Treaty of Paris that finishes it is because he was involved with the first treaty that got the help to come.
Right. Well, the other thing about Benjamin Franklin that's interesting, we can talk about him later though, but is just that his son was one of those loyalists, that he's a great example of someone.
Of RFK Jr. His family are on the Biden administration.
Yeah, so Benjamin Franklin's son was governor of New Jersey.
Right.
And was a loyalist until he left. And that's it. So, you know, it's
And what's
interesting.
funny is as he's leaving is when Benjamin Franklin comes back. So
Right.
they were two ships crossing in the night, literally, in the Atlantic.
Maybe that's where the phrase comes from.
I mean, it might be, but I just think that's really ironic. Like,
Yeah.
it's like he's gone the whole war, and when the war ends, he gets the Treaty of Paris signed. That's when he comes home, and that's when his son is leaving. But he's taking, or his grandson stays in France. Temple.
Right. Well, he became seduced by that French way
Right.
of life.
Yeah.
Then the other person is this Robert Morris, who's heard of him. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of him, but he's not really well known. But look at how significant he was for this whole cause. He wasn't born in the colonies. He's born in England, in Liverpool. So he was a financier. Well, it doesn't say here, but he was a merchant who made a lot of money off of ships and ships that were involved in the slave trade.
Right.
And he had, this is estimated today that he was, I don't know. No, I think actually maybe at that time he had the equivalent of $1 million. He financed the Continental Army and Navy and established the Bank of North America. So there's always some sort of financial
Right.
wizard behind things, making sure things.
Yeah, I guess
can
he would be the
proceed.
Elon Musk.
Yeah, I think he definitely was.
Especially that money was converting merchant ships into warships in 1775. There was no navy, and so the only way that they were going to win the war, even get into one, was to actually make ships that would actually be war-worthy. So they had to convert merchant ships into warships. It wasn't like they were like, yeah, just get everybody down in the Boston Harbor and make warships. No, you got to convert those old ships. And I think the Boston Tea Party kind of helped, you know, people kind of like, okay, we need to have ships, because that's like the thing you're always looking for. Is that a British ship coming in?
Right. Yeah. I mean, that's why the French were so important as well.
Yeah.
And then there's Marquis de Lafayette, who was so important, and he was aristocratic, right?
Yeah, and young too, and young. He was like the social influencer back then for France, to make it cool in France to join the cause.
Yeah, I think he was.
In many ways, he actually, I think, helped start the French Revolution in kind of a weird way. Like, well, if they're able to do it, and if Lafayette went over there, and you think about it, he's setting that seed into the French Revolution that follows. That's the other part of Pluto of Aquarius, is the French Revolution that follows the American Revolution.
Yeah, and that's what I was going to say about Lafayette. What he's a good example of, that whole social media influencer thing, I think is right on, because he is a spokesperson for his generation that is shocking. For back home in France, he's going against his king and his
Yeah.
family. So many people think it's shocking that he would just leave the French military
Right.
and want to come over to America and support or just fight in the war. And
actually fight, like
Yeah.
not just be a social influencer taking, well, there was no photography, painting the imagery of what it looks like to be on the front lines.
no, but
He was actually on those
I wonder
lines.
how many people from Britain came over and tried to pay him off to go to their side and to start talking about how they were the real Enlightenment heroes.
I think that's where history comes in, is there's been more bloodshed between France and England through the millennia, right? That whole
Yeah.
millennium, it's too hard to convince a French person in American colonial territory where there was blood from the French Indian War, or you just go back to their ancestors, and all the wars between England and France for so long.
Right.
That's where the history always kind of
Well,
plays out.
in that case, I want to know who was the British Lafayette. Because I'm actually curious because of what's happened this week with the people going around trying to pay off or find out from influencer who was paying you to talk about Diddy, right? Did you hear that whole story?
Yeah.
And then they're saying, well, we might be able to pay you more if you were being paid.
Right.
But if you weren't being paid, bye, we're leaving. You
Yeah.
know, it's just, I wonder how much of that was happening then too, because Lafayette really did do so much, not just in that, not that he was some brilliant commander, it was that he's this young guy who is motivated by Enlightenment ideals to actually go out and make a change. And I think we talked about this in another episode, I think, so people should go back and look at that one,
Right.
where we're talking about the Enlightenment. But I mean, really, if you look at, there's so many people who were instrumental in just making sure that there were resources.
I was just
because-
going to show his picture and just
Okay.
his wiki so people could see him.
Wow, very ruddy complected.
There's 37 images with him, and that's the birthplace in France where he was born. This was his wife, Marie Adrienne Francios. And that's a statue of him in Metz, where he decided to join the American cause. And then this was a print of him done in 1879, where he was introduced, right? It's kind of a cool pic. It's a plaza where they have where the ship that he was on, the Victoire, which is Victory, set sail on March 25th, 1777. So that's very Pluto Aquarian beginnings. The first meeting of Washington and Lafayette, which was August 3rd, 1777, which would have been that first ingresses of Pluto into Aquarius. And in Philadelphia.
Yeah, he's kind of the first one that comes forward and makes it be known that, wow, this is a movement that's bigger than just
Right.
this group of people here.
Which in many ways, I've thought about this a lot. You can take the Ukraine situation. I think a lot of Americans that are supporting that are looking at it like this. Like, as if we're the French now helping a country liberate itself from Russia. And I can understand that historically with this transit being...
Yeah, but what's interesting, and we started to talk about this earlier, and I don't think we can go into an entire show about this, but at the same time in 1778, Catherine the Great was involved in the area of the Crimea, and in the area of what's Ukraine now, and that they were trying to repopulate the area with Christian farmers, because the Cossack Tartars had been pushed out of the region,
Right.
and they were Muslim. So it was a big shift of population in that region. And it's just like, it's interesting how every time some of these transits show up, the Crimean Peninsula is involved. And we've talked about that in relation to the Black Death, the plague as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's been where, I mean, you know, it's not Pluto Aquarius, but it is the conjunctionalist astrology that we're going through over the period we have been, that was the same as 1345, which an astrologer did predict to the Pope that a massive plague was coming. And it's just very, possibly it's coincidental that in the same exact position the Black Plague started is the same position of this Ukraine war right now with this weapons that we're seeing. And in World War II, it is where Russia or the USSR and the Germans got into a long battle at Stalingrad. Same spot that we're seeing the Ukraine war right now and the plague. And then the Crimea situation is the Black Plague. That's where the bodies started getting thrown over the
As
wall
part of
full of
warfare,
plague,
yeah.
right? So that and then of course there's a lot of talk right now about the if we want to go there, but the laboratories that are in Ukraine all around, the connection to them and bioweapons and all these kind of things. So could this result in a plague, you know? Mm-hmm. We already have seen the nuclear threats, but then, of course, the nuclear power plants that have been under very extreme, cautious situations now and almost dangerous situations because of the war. There's all these old nuclear power plants sitting there in Ukraine that the Russians and the Ukrainians have been fighting over, and it's very World War I, taking it back. No, I've got it back. These regions don't really move much. But now you add the North Koreans, now you're adding firepower from the West, and we're under transits where people really do start. Pluto and Capricorn's the setup. It's like the last pieces on your chessboard before you make the move. Pluto Aquarius is, I didn't see that move coming from that direction. I didn't see the bishop all the way over there. Uh-oh. Mm-hmm. Right? You also have the Pope right now really wanting to end the Palestinian conflict as well, and what's happening in Israel, which that's an interesting twist to it all too. That's more of a Israel's a home of the Zionist idea and religious order, and now you have the Christian order through Catholicism and the Pope going against them. So I think that puts a lot of Christians in a weird place too.
Every alliance out there, I think, seems to be falling apart, which to me makes sense that people would be feeling like removing themselves or trying to go internal. I mean, to me, I've just been feeling like, okay, I'm going to do my own thing.
Right.
And I'm not going to get involved in all this stuff right now, because I think anyone who's been through the past 5 years or so knows we're exhausted by the media wanting to lure us into a new path of consume this now, consume this fear, be afraid of this. And that it's what I see when I watch social media too, is even a lot of people who are having trouble releasing the fear that they had been living under for a really long time. And to me, it just seems like a period of time where everything is up in the air. And if you look at history, this is a time where everything's up in the air. So if we go back to the 18th century at this time, it's not only that there's a revolution happening in what will become the United States, there's also a revolution in labor happening. There are people protesting new developments in industrialism around the same time. There are
technologies coming about, the Enlightenment era.
Mm-hmm. There's missions on the other side of where we're sitting right now. This was the Spanish Empire trying to expand itself in a different direction and making religion part of it. It's a huge time of change. And in the time of Henry VIII, you'd mentioned that before too, right? Where now there's no longer a Catholic church, but for a while people still kind of were Catholic, or they could still, it wasn't clear what was it going to mean. But then there's a period of time where you're going to be super Protestant, and this is what it means. You have to have this prayer book now. And they were trying to really regulate what people did religiously. And then when Queen Mary comes onto the throne, everybody has to turn Catholic. So there's this pendulum swing in a series in very few years where you have to be either super Protestant, then super Catholic. Then Elizabeth comes in and finally regulates it. So to me, I feel like that's what we're in for, would be maybe in the United States, we get out of the wars, I don't know what happens, or we get into a gigantic war. I don't know, because it's just such crazy astrology too, from what you've been talking about. But maybe Trump is there for 4 years, implements all sorts of changes, does get rid of a lot of the bureaucracies that he says he's going to get rid of, but then someone could be elected who brings them all back, or someone could get elected who goes even further, and then someone who comes in and brings it back, because that's the history from this period of time is like a tug of war, where one side almost wins and then the other side almost wins, and then it stalemates, and so.
Yeah, I mean, like you bringing up like the missions, like the Spanish coming in this California territory. I mean, just 15 miles from here, Mission San Juan Capistrano. That was 1776. They built that, and what was interesting is it was about community center, where the community and the religious order kind of comes together, and people can live in harmony together, and farm and be kind of a cultural center. It didn't really work though. Like people got killed at some of them. Like the history of the missions is kind of interesting. Like they actually become targets by ruffians that are not following it, that they get raided, the missions, they get people killed at them, earthquakes, for example. The one here in San Juan Capistrano, the bells fell during an earthquake, and they still show you that whole part that's fallen from it. I mean, like, so there is no stability through the transit. It does stabilize in the mid part of it to the end. There was a picture that was earlier, I had it on, where in 1784, 3 years after the Revolutionary War ends, I mean, we have to wait till there's a Continental Congress that comes together to even make the Constitution. So there's this like really long period after a war where it's just the Confederation of, it's not, there is no United States of America. There is no Constitution. And the Articles of Confederation are running about, and there is no federalized government. There is no president. There is no vice president. And so the leader, who was George Washington, is just chilling at Mount Vernon with Lafayette having talks. Just, and they're not wearing certain type of uniforms. They're just talking about, who knows, maybe old war stories, or maybe the future, or what's going on in France, or who knows. But the same kind of thing goes with Queen Mary after Henry VIII falls. Well, actually it gets weirder, right? The whole entire...
All the Jane Grey stuff.
Yeah, exactly. After his son takes
Edward.
over and dies young, and then Lady Jane Grey, the 6 day, 7 day queen, or whatever, 9 day queen. And then, of course, Mary takes over, and that supposedly stabilizes it, but it's really Elizabeth, and that comes at the end of the transit. And same thing with the Constitution, and George Washington becoming president. He's kind of the Elizabeth of it.
So we are living in the time that's all about the strategy, and people probably just living however they want, and then other people who are thinking, well, I'm going to get myself exactly where I need to be. I keep thinking of Aaron Burr, because he's one of those people who was always trying to lobby or leverage himself and get into the best position, and then it doesn't go so well with him.
Especially financially. I don't know if you remember when we covered him, he took all those loans out, couldn't pay them half the time, and was always back on his big loans and trying to become a big person in the society, and kind of has a bad name, becomes a vice president, and then kills another vice presidential candidate, and then is known as a traitor, and actually is one of the only big American figures that actually did get tried for treason and won in the court. I mean, he's a really wild figure, I would say. But I think when it comes to like, how can somebody take this info in this moment now, especially if they're in America or maybe even in Europe, I would say, what were everybody fighting for before this election? It's like, okay, you got to look at that as kind of the Tea Party movement. You got to look at it as like people were done with the overtaxation, with that representation. People wanted freedom of speech. They wanted freedom of religion. They wanted the freedom to be able to live their lives without these natural rights that were felt. And so that fight began all over again. Censorship happened, medical intrusion, forced medical intrusion, people feeling like the taxes and them going after it, especially as we know now from the data that the Democrat Party is mainly all the richest people, right? Even though I'm not going to say that it's just that, because look at the head of the Republican Party. He's a billionaire and he's hanging out with billionaires. So both parties are in the billionaire pools.
Right.
But
one party's
people-wise,
saying that
though.
they're not.
Yeah, but
One party calls the other party the party
Right.
of billionaires.
Correct. So it's like, okay, so people were like, we don't want to be taxed anymore. We don't want to have our money be wasted. Right? Because that was a similar idea, or the Stamp Act that came prior. And so it's like, okay, those were the issues in their own unique way that were about this, and also happened in Europe. So I think that's what's interesting, is how you see Great Britain, the United Kingdom now under the Labour Party, and a lot of people are not happy with it, right? And there's been censorship there, or you're being arrested if you make a post online.
Right.
That the idea of a patriot movement where we're at is, I can understand from the other side about women's rights, about abortion. It's not so much about women's rights in general, but it's like the question about abortion itself and how it is connected to women's rights. But I find it interesting, like the moment the election happened, the idea of men becoming women really has been a big pushback now in the media and the press, or even it was just a bill that was put on the House floor yesterday where, because there's going to be the first trans woman that's going to be in Congress, and they're not going to let her use the men's restroom. Or the women's restroom, sorry. They're not going to let him use the women's restroom. And so that became a huge thing yesterday in Congress. But the Republicans said no, and I think Pluto and Aquarius also is the end of men taking over women in that way, like literally, like I'm a woman, right? So like that's over. And you kind of see that in the revolution too, is like you see all these men wearing wigs, and
That's true.
you know what I mean? Like, and then that kind of becomes not so fashionable. So it's an interesting moment though, because it's like, well, which side? Well, I'm kind of a man that goes with what's less than or greater than. So when you add up a total of like, what are the issues that people voted for on the right opposed to the left, the ones that match what was happening at the last time Pluto and Aquarius almost verbatim are exactly the same ones. Or even how for a long time, when you and I were at the old studio and 3-4 years ago, we were talking about that the revolution really started with the pamphlets about common sense. And so you hear that being said. The last 2 weeks, I've heard common sense be used in the media or anything like, well, I guess it was the Democrats weren't common sense. It's like, oh, okay, so that's the same. So you want to look for those echoes. And I think that whether I hope I'm wrong, but this whole idea of traitors with loyalists, you are seeing it. Unfortunately, it looks like there is going to be that. I mean, if you don't want to use the American example, use the French example in the revolution. I mean, the American Revolution was bad, but the French Revolution was a horror movie.
For betraying, you mean? Or?
Well, like just the idea of like, you're not really for the people, you're for your money, and Mary and Antoinette's heads off, like this cutting of heads off, rushing into the higher realm, like who has more money, and rushing into their place and taking all their things. And that country went through a revolution that was ugly and really didn't even know where it would end up. And it ended up eventually, of course, not the way that it wanted it to truly be, but at least there was that's what's interesting. If a revolution starts with Pluto and Capricorn, it works in Pluto Aquarius because there's a plan. But if it starts in Pluto Aquarius and there wasn't a lot of stuff coming up to it, it almost does become the weird kind of boomerang effect that you don't think. So it's like, we want to get rid of a king. It eventually just becomes an emperor.
Right.
You know?
Here he comes back again, but he's an emperor.
Napoleon,
this time.
I know.
Okay, so while you were talking, or no, going back to Aaron Burr, because it all needs to go back to Aaron Burr. But I was thinking about the fact that we started tonight talking about Benedict Arnold. We were going to talk about him and the idea of spies, right, in the American Revolution. But here's what I was thinking, that it seems like Benedict Arnold, who was such a betrayer that we just call people Benedict Arnolds now. Right?
Yeah.
So he is the traitor in our minds in America. Mm-hmm. I'll put his picture there if you want to show him too. But he and Aaron Burr, it's interesting that they were both kind of obsessed with money.
Yeah.
Right? Because if you look at Benedict Arnold's, when he got caught, he was trying to sell off something
American
about West Point.
troop. He was selling American troop deployments and also munitions and supply chains. What were the Americans doing with it to John Andre, who was a British officer that was in charge of the spies on their side and was his wife's best friend, who they had a love affair prior.
There's always a woman involved in these things, and I always forget to look them up beforehand. But
and it was for the equivalent of 20,000 pounds, which in those days would be $3 million today. So it was not a little bit of money. It was a lot of money.
But it's interesting that Benedict Arnold is doing all of this for money and also to impress his wife or whatever it is, and his wife is a loyalist, right?
Yeah, because her family in Philadelphia was like the socialites under the old colonial Philadelphia.
And then if we think about Aaron Burr, who was doing whatever it could to get money and going into debt, these are people kind of operating according to an old Capricornian idea of, if I want status, I just need to have the money, and then I can buy.
Do you know what they have in
wealth.
common astrologically?
No.
Pluto and Scorpio.
Oh, both of them are?
Yeah, so the Pluto-Scorpio generation now has to go through 20 years of the Pluto squares. And they're the fastest generation. The fastest of Pluto is Scorpio.
So they're also kind of left out because there's not as many of them.
Yeah, it's only an 11-year cycle. So 11 years of people going through a 20-year square. So the millennial generation, that's more the younger millennial, right? They're the ones now that will do anything for the money.
Uh-oh.
And that's the whole test of Pluto Scorpio is like, are you going to be honest, right? If you do shady things, you're going to get caught. So that Pluto Scorpio generation just woke up in the last 2 days and have 20 years ahead of them where authenticity and, are you going to sabotage your life for money? Because that Pluto Aquarius is also kind of testing, like, what kind of a human being are you? Like, are you trustworthy with people? It's literally like Pluto trust, Aquarius people. It's a simple way to look at it. But the square to Pluto Scorpios is on their desperation or their need. So, am I going to save my relationship? Because really he was trying to save his relationship. She was something he could never attain that he got, but then to keep the attainment of her, because she was a socialite and he was having to hold, he actually begged for the position from Washington to be the general, of course, but also that's acting as the governor of that whole the Philadelphia, which is where the Declaration of Independence was signed. It is the staple of the whole revolution. And so by Washington giving him command over it was, okay, you're my most trusted general. And so he's battling that, but she's talking with loyalists, he's talking with loyalists, and it's like, it reminds me of the Democrats today, like the celebrity ideas. Like, well, the celebrities are here, but you're holding the place because you're a patriot and you're part of the Continental Army, but all the celebrities have some big influence. So he decided to switch sides.
It's interesting too, since he's Pluto and Scorpio, I remember you in the past talking about how they have to always constantly be trying to rise up out of difficult situations.
Yeah.
And I mean, listen to this, that I think it's being shown, right?
Yep.
It says he was passed over for promotion several times. He faced various accusations from opponents. Let me see, what, doesn't it have his past? Here is his childhood. He lost most of his siblings to yellow fever, calamitous events that triggered alcoholism in his father. As a teenager, Arnold's family faced financial hardship. At the age of 16, he enlisted in the militia and served in the French and Indian War. And then he started a successful apothecary business. So he was involved in the drug trade of his time, but legal. But he's out there trying to help cure everybody. So I just think it's interesting that he came from this really difficult childhood and past, and obviously he's trying to better himself through marriage or through his friends or through whatever. And you looked at his chart earlier, and it was
Capricorn,
so interesting to see.
Sun in Capricorn, 24 degree, Pluto in Scorpio, 11 degrees. I don't know why I remember this stupid stuff, but...
Well, I remember his North Node was in Cancer.
Yeah, with Jupiter, Neptune, exact, yeah.
So does that mean he should have been focused on the home more than what he was doing?
I mean, I think it's a little bit more difficult. I mean, it's like his home was about building the home of a new America, right? So he was focused on it. Mm-hmm. But Jupiter and Neptune together, which we had in 2022 in Pisces, right? So he's born during the conjunction in Cancer back then. It's on his North Node, exactly. That Jupiter with Rahu on there, it's whatever's, I just can't have enough. It's never enough. And then you add Neptune. The dream can go even more. And then it starts blurring lines of any boundaries. There's no boundaries at that point. So he lost his understanding of the boundaries. Like, I think he thought, well, I could still be the general here for the Continental Army. And you know what? I can be friends with the Loyalists too. And I can be friends with the British Army too. And maybe I can get some money out of this because she's not going to be with me unless I do that. I'll lose her to them. Mm-hmm. And so it becomes that Jupiter-Neptune, like 5 Jupiter-Neptune conjunct in my 5th. So it's one of those places where, you know, big ideas, biggest dreams of all time. But with the North Node, that's hard. I don't have it with the North Node. Because Rahu is, they always say in Vedic tradition, Jupiter and Rahu, which is the same thing, minus Neptune, is half of the energy of Jupiter's fortune and good luck is just taken away because it's trying to hold back that egoic Rahu, that North Node that dragons had. So you lose half your fortune already with Jupiter conjunct the North Node in your chart. It's gone. It's keeping you at bay from doing stupid stuff. Now you had Neptune, that goes over the top.
But what happened? Because he did some stupid stuff.
Yes, he did, but
so
you know
what
what's
happened to him?
it's the perfect conjunction of his life, because what is it? One, he gets the girl, he was kind of that guy who was desperate to prove himself. He proves himself on the battlefield.
But he didn't get enough attention. He
Right.
like he wounded his leg at the Battle of Saratoga, and then he's not even the hero.
Well, he's looked at as a hero though
But not the. I can't remember who the other guy was that got the attention.
But then, well, Lafayette got bad injured too. But he gets Philadelphia, and then he actually gets the money and gets away, because what he was is, I'm going to give you one of the forts I'm control over that's in New York, because that's where the Continental Army started they were going north and starting to take back over New York. New York was the first thing that got taken away when the British came in. Bye-bye. That's where Washington's biggest loss was New York at the beginning. So that was part of the treaty or the deal. Well, John Andre gets caught. They find the correspondence that he's the traitor. Washington finds out. They're able to stop it from happening, and Benedict Arnold gets away. So then he becomes a British general, a brigadier general, and then they put him back into the war, and here, get troops, and you're under control, and right, of these loyalists, and go fight. And he doesn't die, and his worst thing is that he died back in England, because after the war, he doesn't dare stay. And he died wearing his continental uniform. So it's regret. It's like, his Jupiter Neptune was like, was it worth that girl? Was it worth all that money? Was it worth all that stuff? Right? It's that spiritual part, that Jupiter in Cancer. It's like, he actually did know home the whole time, but he imagined it being somewhere else. And it wasn't it. It was that blue Continental Army outfit that he was wearing the whole time as a general, and his friendships with Washington and with all the other patriots. And so that's the saddest part of his story, is that he dies in England alone, he doesn't stay with his wife either long at the end, but dies alone wearing Continental uniform. Now, maybe he just knew how history would be written, so he wanted to at least end with that.
Yeah, he's like, well, at least I'll be remembered one day.
Who knows if that's true, but I mean, I'm sure it is. Historians have all said that's what happened, and I'm sure they've spent a lot of time to get that truth.
I need to look into that to see if there's anyone who says, no, it didn't really happen. There's always someone.
Well, and I think what's interesting, you and I kind of talked about this, so like this week on MSNBC, the biggest hosts of that show, Morning Joe, that really don't like Trump, last week on Friday did go to Mar-a-Lago and try to bring some peace and to try and find a way to get along, even while having very opposite views in politics and in the world and so forth. And now you're seeing the ideas being thrown around that they're traitors because they're doing that. So the left now, or especially I went on that Blue Sky app and made a profile, the Leo King on there, following one person. Nobody's following me. But I went on there and it's like, all I did was type in like Morning Joe. It's crazy. Everybody's like, they're traitors. I just remember we were laughing. It was like some mom. It's like, Mom, dog lover, all that. Fuck you, Joe Scarborough. Fuck you, Mira. Like
you're
it's just
the
like
toxicity with you.
Tens of thousands of posts that they're traitors. But I don't think that's the traitors we're going to see. It's got to be from the Patriot side to go to the other side. So an example would be like, well, using the astrology, it would be a Pluto Scorpio. Like it would be like a Vivek Ramaswamy going, I don't know if I want to do this anymore, and I'm joining over on CNN, or I'm gonna join the Democrats to go do something. Because for me, I'm going to be looking for the Pluto Scorpio. That's on the Trump side or Trump team. Or there was just some leaks recently, and it got really heated within the Trump camp because there was this staffer that's been on Trump's staff throughout all the elections and so forth, and on his team, but he started leaking stuff, and they went on him really hard, and Elon Musk went on him. I don't think he's Pluto Scorpio though, but it's like you're already starting to see there's people who could sell something that people would want to know in the press about Trump for a lot of money in order to, or with this Matt Gaetz situation or something like that. So that's going to be, I think, the more bigger, what? Right? And it has to be somebody that he's put in a very high place of power.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be RFK, even if he's forced to eat McDonald's or not.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because he's got one foot in the other camp. I mean,
yes.
Right? And I think he is a Democrat, but I guess the difference is is he still, what is he even registered as now? I don't know.
He's technically his own party, the Freedom Party, I think it's called.
Yeah, but it's really interesting. To me, the biggest surprise right now has been that the sides are so entrenched that, for example, the Blue Sky app, it can't be. What I like, the woman, Amanda Ellis, who is a channeler, and she does videos where she talks about current events, and then she uses cards, and and channels Metatron. Have you watched her stuff?
No.
Well, she always talks about the violet pill. Like, instead of the red pill or the blue pill, take the violet pill. And she's all about kind of finding this middle ground. But you don't see that, really. So for people to just say, okay, I'm going to join the Blue Sky app. It's blue, so you're stating up front, it's not just about blue sky. You can choose your own algorithm,
Right.
which you were explaining to me, so that you can only just see the happy things you want to see. But it's also that you're staking your claim as, I'm blue, I'm forever blue.
Oh, right.
And I just don't, that allegiance, I think, is strange. I don't know, where's the evidence that your top priority for either side, right? I think the best way, the thing that's interesting is that if you look at the time of the American Revolution, we were talking about, kind of this idea of power, sort of who's winning at that time. It was the people who won, right? It's the people who are overturning the old order. And that's what happened also within the French Revolution. The people are overturning the old order, but then the people turn on each other, and it spirals, and they have to bring back in Napoleon. So are we going to be able to navigate through a period of time where the people are supposed to be having a victory? And it's not this idea that we're all going to come together in a global unity party and we will all be singing the Age of Aquarius or whatever it is. I'll never forget in one of your videos, David, where you showed that video of the Aquarian people dancing all in the same outfit.
Right.
I don't remember what that video was, but it was some utopian idea from the 70s. It's not going to be that. I think it's a period of time where we have to be comfortable in our own communities and our own families and what we're doing, where we do have to rise above. Like, eventually, we have to rise above the sides and just get back to normal. So to be entrenched in another side it's just like a war. I mean,
Yes.
It really is like, and we're in a digital war right now. That's also spilling out into this real war, but that's being run by people who aren't even supported really by the people, because no person voted for us to send missiles or to
Right.
sponsor missiles going into another country. So it's really strange. It's a strange period of time.
It is, and there's lots of paintings of there's people being hung outside the window, and it's like two women knitting, and it's in the window, but they're knitting. Like, I'm not looking at that. It reminds me of what you said with the whole Blue
Yeah.
Sky app. Like, I don't want to see what's happening.
Isn't that that's actually something?
It's a
one of the pictures
Salem.
from the Salem.
It's Salem.
Yeah.
But then also, like, when you go into Revolutionary War, like people being hung for treason, which is definitely very much during this transit. The way that everybody starts looking, and it's always by trees, which kind of brings back the Salem thing, if you think about it, like in many ways. But, it becomes this more normalized situation. I mean, all these paintings, here's Benedict Arnold, a painting about Benedict Arnold, right, in his new home in the New York Military Museum, or here's one of the rebels being caught in the British Army, about to hang them for treason. And we have to remember that treason is still part of the United States Constitution. Mm-hmm. So, the way that the more modern day, stuff in the streets, I wouldn't be surprised of it starting to feel chaotic, because it does get to where people want Pluto Aquarius, yet it's going to bring people together under Pluto pretenses. And Pluto pretenses are very much this. And then I know there's all these new age people saying, well, the timelines are changing. That's not going to happen. Well, as an astrologer, those things do happen, unfortunately. I mean, it does get to that place where it just, it also happens in the towns and villages. It doesn't happen out on the prairie.
Where the people get hung up
Yeah.
for treason. You know,
Or just even like if you think of what's happening right now with this mass deportation that's about to happen, that Trump's setting up, they're getting it all together. That's not going to just happen in the distance, right? If you're in an apartment complex and there's knowingly known people, like in Aurora, Colorado, for example, like there's going to be a military presence, especially with the military being used. That's what he's getting authorization for right now. So the idea that these kind of weird things won't happen, they're going to happen. And you know that's what's going to be an interesting thing for people, because let's just, I mean, that's going to be what's really weird, is you're mixing the Civil War of America, Neptune at the end of Pisces, mixing the World War II element, and then you're mixing this Revolutionary War, and the Revolutionary War transit's happening now first. The next one to hit will be the Neptune Aries transit, which is the Civil War. The last one will be the World War transit. But then all of those played out through Uranus and Gemini, which does ingress next year in the late spring of 2025. Neptune in the early spring of 2025. So to have all those happening, they of course don't stay in those signs. They retrograde back in the fall. And then we see at the end of fall, of course, in the beginning of winter, Uranus station direct, come into Gemini in 2026, Saturn, Neptune, January 2026. And that's when all three planets, outer planets, are in their all new sign, and they're all coming into these big grand sextiles with the big, when Jupiter comes into Leo, the Jupiter trine Neptune, the Jupiter sextile Uranus, the Jupiter that also opposes Pluto. You know, there's some really positive stuff to that. But that also does mean that the consolidated time from now to that 2027 is going to be extreme. And that's kind of the point where I think it'll dissipate. But
I think what's interesting is that it can get extreme, but the examples that you were just showing of